registration, you need to make some periodic filings. Basically, the whole essence is to update, to keep CAC updated on your activities. So one is annual returns, and for starters, I believe an average Nigerian knows what annual returns is, even in the business world. But for starters, it basically reflects the financial position of your company for a financial year. So it basically shows how the company has been faring. It will usually reflect the annual turnover. The turnover, the net profit, all of those things it will contain it. But then it's necessary that you actually file these things at the CAC. It's very necessary. It's a provision, and most of the times when you Google some random companies and you check on the portal, on the CAC portal, you see something like inactive status. So this is like one of the things that contribute to that, because when you fail, on your part to actually, remit, do the necessary remittance, do the necessary filings periodically as provided, by CAMA, and as mandated, as implemented by the CAC. One of the things that happen is that your status on the portal does not show active, because they believe that probably you're not in business at the moment. All right, so that's what happens. But if you're in business, it's very necessary, because potential investors, they could just come around and say, let's say they want to invest in this company. They can go on their own and check, and if they see something like inactive status, it could be something that actually puts them off from actually investing in your company. So it's very necessary you go through the labor, go through the stress. It's not even a stress anyways. Just be compliant, basically. Be compliant. It's for your ultimate good at the end of the day. So that is for annual returns. We also have taxation. And I'm sure you know that there are laws that govern taxation. We have various tax policies. We have different arms of taxation. Some are industry specific, some are just general in the application, right? So we're looking at just a few of them. Just to kind of like help us to know what we need to do. If we already know it's good, if we don't know it, then it will help us. Now we have the company income tax. Now for every company registered in Nigeria, it is expected that you pay your tax. So the Company Income Tax Act, the Companies Income Tax Act actually provides for this, and of course it is every remittance you make is made to the FIRS, the Federal Inland Revenue Service. So it is mandated, it is a mandatory thing for you as a business owner, for every company to actually pay their tax, specifically the company's income tax. It is very necessary. And speaking of the rates, it's mainly 30%. Usually if your company has an annual turnover of 100 million and above, beyond more than 100 million naira, you actually have to remit 30% of of your profits and all that. So 30%. But if if your annual turnover is between 25 million naira to 100 million naira, 100 million naira, you'll be remitting 20%. And where it is less, you are practically exempted. You don't have to remit. So that's the provision on that. So less than 25 million naira, you won't have to remit, taxes. But for 25 million to 100 million, 20%. More than 100 million, that is above more than 100 million naira, you have to remit 30%, to the FIRS. It's a mandatory provision. It is very necessary. Now let's look at capital gains tax. So this is another one. This one, the rate is 10%, and basically it is charged. This particular one it's a remittance you make over assets you dispose. We're talking about assets like stocks, bonds, all of those, real estate, all of those things. There are calculations. We won't be getting into all of those details, but then there are calculations that go around it where you calculate and then you know the amount you pay. So the rate is 10%. It is mandatory you do this. So another one is petroleum profit tax, and like the way it sounds already, we already know that it's governed by the Petroleum Profit Tax Act, and that it applies to companies in the petroleum industry, in the upstream sector. So one thing is very important. One thing that's very important for us to note here, right, is that it's not necessarily all companies within the petroleum sector that will actually remit their tax to under the PPTA, right? So generally, there are businesses that there are companies under the sector that deal with oil production. So they deal with crude oil production. So these companies ordinarily, yes, they would pay their taxes under PPTA, which is usually 30%, like the company's income tax. So they pay the 30%. But for companies that actually does deal with marketing, servicing companies that actually do this oil production, really, they would usually come under the company's income tax. So they also pay 30%, like we already said beforehand. So it's necessary you understand this distinction. Right, so it's not the fact that you're in the petroleum industry doesn't necessarily mean that you remit your tax under PPTA. It could be PPTA, it could be CETA, company income tax, depending on the kind of business you run in relation to crude oil and the upstream sector. That being said, there's also the value added tax. I'm sure we're all familiar with this. When we make phone calls, we see that thing where you see VAT. Yes, basically it applies to it is remitted over supply of goods and services that are made to the public. So, and we know that of recent, okay, before we look at that, the rate is 7.5%. Prior to 2020, I think thereabouts it was 5%. Until the regulations were revised and increased to 7.5%. And we also know that as at February 1, 2020, the telecom industry had to adopt the provision, because of course the telecom industry, they render services to Nigerians by providing SIMs and all of those things. So you have 7.5% for customers that are using it. In other words, we Nigerians, we get to pay more and all of those things, but then 7.5% is the rate for the value added tax, which does not exempt telecom industries as well. So that is that for tax. There are more. We have the education tax, we have more, right? But then this is the limit, this is the extent to which we'll be taking the one for tax. Now there's also the employee compensation scheme. So basically what this one entails that an employer is expected to pay 1% of the employee salary into the employee compensation fund. So now the essence of this is to help the employer and the employee, both of them. So this is paid into that fund in order to, just for rainy days, basically, for times of emergency, times of negative occurrences, quote and unquote, happening, and this is very, very practical, because if you come to court, most of the issues you see are around employees having injuries and then all of those things. So the thing here is this: in the event of those negative occurrences happening, it's for the employer to actually apply to there's a board that actually oversees, which is the Nigerian Social Insurance Trust Fund Board. This is the board that actually oversees the implementation of these funds. This board also has the power to, when they discover that an employer is not making remittances, they can actually institute legal actions as well. So the whole essence of this remittance, this 1% of the employee salary into this fund, is for rainy days, like I already said. And there are times, and this happens daily, especially in a factory setting where people work and then someone gets injured, So basically, if there's a case of injury or any kind of occurrence whatsoever, it's something you can, the employer applies to this fund, to this board that we just mentioned, and then they get, the amounts due to the employee who has been negatively affected by something at the workplace, and then ultimately is for it saves the employer from spending more, and then of course it helps cater for the injured employee. So it's for the good of everybody at the end of the day. But nobody also prays for negative occurrences. But then it's also necessary that you make these remittances for situations like this that we can't even we can't expect. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't pray for it to happen. All right. So we also have the Industrial Training Fund, the ITF, the Industrial Training Fund. So this one is mainly, it's also 1%. The employer remits 1% of the annual payroll. So basically this is also remitted, and the essence of this is for trainings, basically, to better optimize the Nigerian economy. So this is where these funds are basically diverted towards training in management, technical skills, and entrepreneurship, all of those things. So to better optimize the Nigerian economy. So that's the essence of the Industrial Training Fund. So I hope we get this. And there's also the Nigerian Immigration Service. So this one basically applies to companies that have foreign employees under their payroll. So it is very necessary